This is probably no surprise, but when it comes to Vortex Fragoris, this is definitely the most complex tracks in terms of the bass sounds. Well, it's a track that's almost 26 minutes long. I have 13 different presets on my Boss ES8 for this track. Took me like 8 hours to do it. Also, all of the songs from the second album that I talked about, I used both pickups engaged, so the bridge and the neck pickup, but with the Vortex Fragoris, I'm actually using the bridge pickup exclusively. This is also because Vortex Fragoris is a sequel to the track Cortex Labyrinthus from the first album, and actually the last chorus in Cortex Labyrinthus was played on this pickup, and I sort of decided to keep that bright color. I'm using it in the whole track, and you can also see this, the capo. Yeah, actually, usually the tracks, I have the C# drop tuning, because Vortex is actually in D drop tuning, so I have the capo. It's just easier this way. Kali 76 compact bass compressor is my always on pedal. Basically every preset I have it on, so that's always my first in chain pedal. I won't be mentioning that with the other pedals. When the song starts, basically that first sound that we hear is the combination of the auto swell from the Strymons Mobius. This is the same preset that I used at the beginning of We're Building Our Monument, and I've used it on a couple other tracks on the first album. This is basically an emulation of a volume pedal, and it makes me lose some of that attack at the beginning. And also makes it more washy. Then I'm using a patch called Afterneath on Zoya, which basically emulates a very legendary Afterneath reverb pedal from Earthquake Devices. I used to own this pedal back in 2016 and 2017. Then I sold it to Nico, the saxophone player on the first album, and he used it quite a lot. It's a very specific reverb that has a beautiful sound. There are like these little drops that you can hear. At this point you can download it from the patch storage, but there's a newer version. I'm using Afterneath version 4. The way the patch is set with the version 4 is just the sound that I want. I'm pretty sure you can get it from a newer versions, but you gotta play around with it a little bit, and I'm just using this version that you probably can't get anymore. And the last thing that I add is H9 from Eventide, and this is the Harmadillo preset, which is essentially like a harmonic tremolo. And I really love how the tremolo part of it slows down as the sustain goes away. And now everything together. This is used at the very beginning of the track and also for those two saxophone solo-ish parts as well. The second sound is simpler. I'm basically having just the black hole algorithm from H9, which is this very iconic, huge reverb. The final preset in part 1 is pretty complicated, so what we've got here again is the same auto swell as I used in the first preset. Then we have a multi-tap delay from the Empress Effects ecosystem, and this is a very cool delay because essentially you have 5 repeats that you can tap. So any way you tap it, that's how it's going to be repeated. And I created this sort of a slowing down pattern. So this is how that multi-tap delay sounds on its own. It's got that beautiful slowing down that is actually exactly in the tempo. The final sound is from H9 and this is the trem verb, so tremolo slash reverb. And this is one of the most iconic sounds from the first album. This is how Vortex Labyrinthus starts. And because Vortex Fragoris is a sequel to Vortex Labyrinthus, I wanted a sound that would sort of reference the song. This is how it sounds on its own. And this is how it sounds together.
There's a sense of destiny, and I know it's a sign.
I programmed the mute switch to turn off the auto swell so that as we go on, the attack becomes more audible. And then with my expression pedal, I turn off the trem verb completely, so it's just the ecosystem's multi-tap delay.
The scenery is so mesmerizing, and I'm so prepared.
So one thing I forgot to mention is that part 1 is actually in 115 BPM, and then from part 2 until the end we stay in 140 BPM. Now we go into part 2 where I have 4 main sounds. The first one is basically just the analog octaver from the Red Witch's Zeus pedal and the preamp slash overdrive from the Darkglass Electronics. The overdrive setting is the same one that I used a lot on both of the records, but the only difference here is that the drive knob is not fully clockwise, but it's actually at 11 o'clock, making it a bit more subtle. When we go into the main theme, so what we've got here is the compressor overdrive and the analog delay from the ecosystem. This delay is actually an emulation of the Echo Rack, so it means that you have a couple of the playback heads that you can play with. This is how the delay sounds on its own. With the overdrive. So there's not much happening, but once I start playing, and when I sing, I mute the strings with my palm so it creates more of a rhythmical feel.
I know I too will become the one.
Then in the choruses in part 2, basically I add the analog octaver. I also add the flanger, which is the silver flanger from the Strymons Mobius. This is how it sounds on its own. And there is this interesting analog delay that fills in the spots where I'm not playing. Unfortunately, in the mix, you probably just hear those accents and you don't really hear the repeats that well. That's because there's just a lot of stuff happening in the choruses. You know, I sing, saxophone plays a different melody, there are drums, there are synths, so it was a little bit hard to mix, and you can't prioritize every sound. So it is a little bit in the background, but you can still hear that rhythm. and that delay just sort of fills in the space. You can kind of hear it there, but it's not that obvious. We also have an instrumental mid section in part 2, and here, apart from the compressor and the overdrive, I have the phaser from Strymon Mobius. This is the same kind of phaser I used in the track Lonely Crossings, and I have a tape delay from Ecosystem. Now we go to the part 3 that actually starts with a similar interplay as was this mid section, but we have different sounds here. Again, apart from the compressor and the overdrive, I have the flanger, but this time it's the gray flanger from the Strymon Mobius, and I'm using an analog delay from the Ecosystem. Also, talking about the story, this is where things start getting darker, so this is why I chose an analog delay which has much darker repeats. It kind of helps to strengthen the overall darkness of this part. The next preset is one of the most overused combinations, so the compressor in the overdrive, but this time the drive knob is fully clockwise, so we get that really meaty and gritty sound. And this is used for all of the riffs for the chorus in part 3. The only other different sound I have in part 3 is basically the compressor, the overdrive, and again, gray flanger. This is for the verses where things get more textural, it's more ambient-ish. In part 4, I basically have only one sound, and it's a pretty interesting one. Again, I have the compressor, I have the black hole reverb again, and then I have the saxophone patch from Zoya. This is a pretty iconic patch at this point, and it's supposed to emulate saxophone or trombone, hence the play on words saxophone. You would probably not really think that it's the bass guitar playing it, so this is how it sounds. Also in this section we basically go from minor to major, and it was very important for me to make that transition not very audible. That's why when we go to that major note, you can barely hear it. There is no bass in part 5, and in part 6 basically I have only 2 more sounds left. So what you hear at the beginning is actually just the compressor and a tape delay from Ecosystem. This is the Space Echo emulation, and I actually had a much more detuned delay here originally in the demo, but once the strings came in, it didn't sound good. It was too pitchy, so you can hear a little bit of the original one. I also have the expression pedal program to switch between a quarter note and dotted quarter note. Basically the main theme is played with a dotted quarter note, and then there is this one section where I go to the quarter one. I really love how it sounds, because to me that dotted quarter is sort of a pulling the music back, whereas normal quarter is just making it go forward. The final sound in this section is basically used for the choruses, for the solo part, and that's just the compressor and the overdrive. But once again, the drive knob on the overdrive pedal is at 11 o'clock, making it more subtle.